We're doing a book signing on Fridays with Bill, which is my new book on Patriots coach Bill Belichick. And the reason we're doing Fridays as opposed to the other day, it's the best day of the week to talk with him at his press conferences. Bill tends to have a reputation as being very terse, but Friday, the game plan's in, the media crowd at the press conference is down to maybe 5 or 6 people, the people that he calls the Friday warriors, the few, the proud, not the free. So what this allows the writers to do is to kind of get him to chat about his philosophy, kind of get his take on things that he wouldn't have time for. He wouldn't have time to get the question in on Wednesday when the whole world is there. So I went back over the transcripts the Patriots have, every press conference for the last 10 years on Friday only, and was able to get literally a full book out of that, just on various topics. I'd worked for the Globe for over 40 years, and one of my jobs was to do feature stories. And especially as the Patriots would get closer to the playoffs, closer to the postseason, I'd be there more and more. His legacy is going to be his teams always get better. They're always competitive. They almost always beat the teams that they were supposed to beat. And most of the players, when they're let go, don't do as well later as they do here. He's very good at simplifying the whole do your job thing, but he tells you what the job is. He says, you can't tell them 1,000 things during the week. Tell them the 3 things that they need to know what to do. So he's very good at boiling the game down and getting players to be able to buy in. If the NFL goes to a different rule interpretation, what's a catch, he's not going to be complaining about it. He'll find a way to be able to deal with it. And so his teams are always up to date. He's very much in the moment. I always tell people, anytime I've been in a Belichick press conference, I come out feeling better organized and more clear about the world. So if he has that effect on me, who's there once every few weeks, imagine what the effect he has on people who are there every day.
I want to welcome you all here. I'm thrilled to see all these faces. My name is Phyllis. I am the author of The Women of Southie, Finding Resilience During Whitey Bulger's Infamous Reign. My co-author is Anna Weeks, and this is one of our Southie women, Nancy Young. Without any further ado, I want to tell you, first of all, I'm very happy to be here all the way in this other world called Hingham. I think I needed a passport to get from Marblehead to Hingham, through the tunnel, over the bridge. It was quite a ride, but we are here. Hingham has always been a little bit special to me since my college roommate and very dear friend, Avis Rubin Goldstein, is right over there. Avis was a teacher in Hingham schools for about 75 years and kind of knows a lot of people here. So if you don't know Avis, she's much more important than I am. So hopefully you'll get to meet her. Okay, without any further ado, I'm also aware that Hingham is very close to South Boston, closer to South Boston than Marblehead. So before I introduce you and let Anna and Nancy do a little more speaking, let me tell you briefly how a rather nice, unadventurous, bookish lady from Marblehead, who honestly never knew the difference between South Boston and the South End, who rarely saw anything more of Boston other than the School of Journalism at BU, and had certainly never heard of that Whitey Bulger guy, found her own life so deeply connected with these women here, as well as to the other 4 women of Southie. All this happened because of Anna Weeks over here, who was truly my co-author in many ways. When I first met Anna, she was the future wife of Kevin Weeks, who happened to be Whitey Bulger's chief lieutenant for 25 years, in case you haven't heard of him. Kevin was about to be released from prison for his part in 5 of Whitey's murders. In a plan to help Kevin avoid wrongful death suits from the 5 victims' families, lawyers concocted a plan where he would write his story and half of his profits would go to the victims' families, who would then forget any wrongful death suits that they might have against him. Kevin could come out of prison, he could lead a good life, he could earn a living, and the victims' families would receive money from the book. It sounded like a great idea, except for one major problem. Kevin had no intentions of telling his story. He and Whitey had committed all their crimes under the guise of darkness, and there's only one photo that was ever taken of them during their years together, and the last thing he wanted to do was spill his story in a book. Actually, there was one other thing he definitely did not want to do, and that was to write the book with me. You see, I had written another book about a much lesser figure in the Whitey Bulger world. He was a kind of small level leg breaker named Eddie McKenzie. We wrote a book called Street Soldier. Kevin despised that book. He felt everything in it was not truthful. Well, it might not all have been completely truthful, but whatever was in it offended Kevin deeply, and he did not want to write the book with the author of that book. There he was, writing a book he didn't want to write with a woman he did not want to write with. So it really started off great. To make a long story short, once Kevin was released from prison, we began to write his story. And things could not have been more difficult. It was absolutely crucial that Kevin's story be 100% truthful. Otherwise, he could get back in jail very easily from perjury. In other words, if he had committed a crime on December 23rd, 1987, and I wrote in the book that he had committed the crime on December 24th, changing the date very, very small, it was enough that they could bring him back under perjury. If I put the wrong amount of money in the book that they got from the heist, that was enough. So every little detail had to be perfect. Night after night, Kevin and I talked, or whether he yelled, convinced that I knew absolutely nothing about extortion, money laundering, bookmaking, the vig, the juice, never mind murder. Not only was he right, but to make it worse, he could not have been a worse teacher. So many nights he would hang up on me, swearing he would never talk to me again, and I was certain that the book, and probably even me, were heading for a dirt nap. Yet, somehow, thanks to only one person, his adored girlfriend Anna, Kevin would call back, and we would make some progress. Anna, I could not help but think, was such an interesting character, so much more so than her boyfriend. An inner Boston City school teacher, still legally married to a man who had spent most of their 25 years together in prison, Anna was warm, intelligent, kind, beautiful, and a force to be reckoned with. I was especially intrigued when in the middle of one of our shouting matches, Kevin would receive a call from Anna. His voice would change. It got soft, sweet, kind, as he said, "Gotta hang up, it's Anna." During the year it took to get the necessary material from Kevin, I got to know Anna equally as well. Since she was my only one link to Kevin, I was deeply grateful as well as interested in her. Somehow we began meeting for walks on Revere Beach on weekends during her school vacations, and during these walks she told me about her first marriage, her attempts to divorce her imprisoned husband, the years of abuse she had suffered at his hands, and her fear of getting even more involved with a man like Kevin Weeks. I was in shock during most of these conversations, trying to connect the horrific stories she was telling me to the lovely, graceful school teacher who was walking beside me. But her heart belonged to Kevin Weeks, and I was so curious to find out who this woman really was. I can surely tell you more about her story in a little bit, but I can tell you that Kevin's book was finished. It became a New York Times bestseller. It was called Brutal, and Kevin and I, once we stopped shrieking at each other, became buddies. And long before that happened, Anna and I had become very special friends, and I was positively certain that her story was going to be far more fascinating than his. The fact that Anna had written copious notes about her life inspired me even more to tell her story. And when she introduced me to Nancy and the 4 other women whose lives were pretty nearly as intriguing, I knew Anna and I had a book. Let me tell you just a little bit about the other women in the book who are not here before I let these ladies tell you their stories. I was a pain in the ass most of my 40 years, admits Tori Donlin, the freckle-faced redhead who turns heads with her understated prettiness and swimmer's body. You wouldn't expect less from a 5th-generation Southie woman. Tori is the second oldest of Elaine Sweeney McGuire's 37 and growing, a high number since Elaine McGuire is often considered the matriarch of Southie. Can you even imagine 37 grandchildren? Have any of you ever heard of the McGuires? Good. Life changed drastically when Tori was 17 and had 2 wisdom teeth pulled. When the doctor gave her a Vicodin prescription, her boyfriend told her to say Vicodin makes you sick and get a new prescription for Percocet. I did, said Tori, and then I thought, whoa, this is so easy. Drugs from doctors' prescriptions continued to be an easy reach for her. Now the people I hung out with were easy for me to be with. I'm pretty intelligent, and I like the hustle of this lifestyle. I've been experimenting with drugs since I was 17, but now at 19, I was a daily user, she said. Waiting for a dealer was a lot faster than standing in line trying to get into Triple O's. By 1997, when she was 20 and had her own failed suicide attempt, Tori found the streets of South Boston infested with Oxycontin. I continued to work the system, but 6 or 7 years later, people were dying of heroin. It was a matter of picking your poison. I stopped hanging with people if they weren't using drugs. By 21, Tori had moved from Oxy and graduated to heroin. Everything in her life changed again one afternoon in 2002 when Tori was 25. She was lying in her youngest sister's bed in South Boston, stoned, watching television and waiting for her dealer to call her back. I knew nothing about the military, she says, but this commercial came on called Accelerate Your Life, about the Navy. It gave me a number to call. I'm really not aware of what I was doing. I made the call. All I knew, I didn't have 10 cents to my name, and I had to get the hell out of Southie. 10 minutes later, her drug dealer arrived with her drugs, and 10 minutes after that, the local recruiter was at her house. 3 months later, she was being deployed to Baghdad on the USS Boxer, along with 4,000 personnel and 60 other women. Now, trained as a medic, Tori found easy access to drugs. Her favorite were the fentanyl morphine patches she used like an EpiPen on herself. A year and a half later, Tori fainted on the desert outside Baghdad. When she recovered, she was astonished to learn she was 5.5 months pregnant. 2 weeks later, she was honorably discharged from the Navy and headed back to Boston. Despite her heavy use of drugs in the Navy, the beautiful baby girl who was born 3 months later changed Tori's life again, only this time in magical and wonderful ways. One issue, however, Tori is very clear about. In no way was Southie to blame for my drug use. I made the choices, and they were poor choices. I don't think it matters where you are. Drugs don't discriminate. I consider it a badge of honor to be from Southie. Elaine McGuire Donlin is Tori's mother. Hyannis had the Kennedys, Southie had the McGuires. It's a bold statement, but when it comes to the vast reach of this family's heritage, the McGuires have earned their position in Southie. Through their stories, we get a panoramic tour of the city of South Boston and a deeper look into the inner workings of the customary way of life of a proud Irish family. But the McGuire reputation went far beyond just being large and good-looking. They were strong-willed activists, standing up vocally for justice and things they believed in, namely what was good for the community of South Boston. Elaine's mother, Tori's remarkable grandmother, Elaine Sweeney McGuire, even managed to work full-time for the telephone company while raising 10 kids. She would do the 11 to 7 shift overnight, arriving home in time to get her 10 kids out of bed, dressed, fed, and on their way to school. And believe me, we were immaculate every time we left that house, her oldest daughter, Elaine Donlin says. We were dressed to the nines, looking like we had walked out of the bandbox. Us girls with long finger curls and bows in our hair, our school uniforms starched and spotless. It was part of the Southie mother's mindset that their kids had to look perfect every time they left the house for school or for church. No matter how tired she was, our mother polished our shoes and scrubbed our laces clean before she left for work at 11. But it was Elaine's mother who sent the most fear running through the veins of any kid in Southie, not just her brood of 10. At any time of the day, my mother would come barreling into the projects in her blue beach wagon, yelling like hell for me, and everyone quaked, including me, Elaine says. My mother never hesitated, even for a second, to deliver brute force if one of us kids misbehaved or just annoyed her. As the oldest, I got far more than my share of devastating blows. I promised myself I would never lay a hand on any of my kids, and I never did on any of my 3 daughters. Still, Elaine's memories of her Southie background are filled with stories of love and laughter. One day, my mother wheeled a couple of us kids in the stroller to go to Bell's, the neighborhood grocery store. When she came out of the store, her arms filled with groceries, she walked home, forgetting about the stroller. An hour later, when her mother was in the midst of her daily routine of hauling her body outside the house to complete her chore of washing the windows, someone from the store called to tell her she'd left 2 kids in a stroller. She told him to bring them home whenever he could. No rush. It might have been a bit weird to leave a kid somewhere, but it was safe to do that in Southie, Elaine explains. But having dirt on your windows was absolutely not permitted. Even though Elaine was out of school and married during the era of busing, some of her younger brothers and sisters were affected by the difficult situation. St. Augustine had closed its school in 1971, so all of my siblings were in public school then, Elaine says. Louise Day Hicks was a true hero then, so was Mayor Flynn. If I'd had a gun, I would have killed that Judge Garrity. He did terrible damage to our city by coming down with that desegregation ruling. He gave Southie an unfair reputation as a racist place where everyone hated blacks, and that just was not true. We all got along. Another lady was Marie Falcione Hardy. Anyone know Elaine by any chance? Despite her own stress and later health problems, Marie had established a reputation as the go-to Southie woman for anyone who needed extra help or extra cash. There was always a family who didn't have a turkey for Thanksgiving or Christmas, Marie said. I was happy to buy and deliver the turkey and the fixings or make sure a tree was delivered to the front door. Yet there was much in Marie's life that caused her deep pain. Melissa, the youngest of her 4 kids, a beautiful young woman with a serious addiction problem, delivered the greatest heartache, though not with her unplanned pregnancy. When Melissa became pregnant as a teen, I was originally devastated, Marie said. But I listened to my aunt who kept telling me, you're going to love the baby, feed it, bathe it, and raise it. And that's just what I did, thankfully with the support from Buddy. That was her longtime partner for many years. For 35 years. He was a longshoreman, Buddy Norton, and he was by her side. Together, they raised Melissa's son, McKinnon, known as Mac. Heartbreakingly, Marie's adored Melissa was inhumanely murdered by her boyfriend she was trying to leave. For Melissa's funeral mass at St. Bridget, the church where she had been baptized and made her first Holy Communion, mourners from all walks of life paid their respects to a young woman whose life had been cut short by a brutal murder. No one in Southie turns his back on an innocent victim like Melissa, Marie said. They stand up. They show solidarity for one of their own. When I look back to the day that Melissa told me she was pregnant, I know that day proved the beginning of a blessing. I was 52 when Buddy and I began to raise Mac, and I've loved every day I've been with him since. Here is a part of an essay that Marie and Buddy's Mac wrote in the 8th grade. My Nana took me in. She didn't have to, because it meant no retirement. The rest of her life was bringing me up. Most 68-year-olds are retired in Florida, sitting under the palm trees. Not my Nana. She is home making sure I eat, study, go to bed early. She showed me love and loyalty to your family. Whenever I wanted to give up or just get satisfactory work, she pushes me to do my best. All she asks is that I do good in school. When I grow up, I wish I could be half the person she is. Though Marie sadly died of pulmonary fibrosis complications on January 18, 2017, her heartbroken partner, Buddy, still lives with her grandson, Mac, and guards their endless supply of photos and memories. There were tough times in Marie's life, Buddy said, but there were good times, especially for Mac. It's Mac that gives him the reason to keep living, just the way it did for Marie. Karen Weeks Rakes is one strong lady, and that is putting it mildly. As Kevin Weeks' younger sister, she did not need to rely on her brother to handle her battles on the streets of Southie. But in the home in which they were raised, it was a different story. As a matter of fact, the only reason Karen chose to share her story was to explain the home in which her gangster brother grew up to other people, so that perhaps they could understand why he became the person he was, and why it was safer on the roughest street in Southie than in the Weeks home, in which Karen and her 2 sisters and 3 brothers were raised. Growing up in a household where her father made brute force the daily staple of life, Karen learned at an early age to use her fists and take no prisoners. The girl who grew up in the old colony projects in Southie, living with a father who beat and humiliated her, who taught her how to protect herself from everyone except him, and a mother who did far worse by never lifting a finger to protect her, has somehow managed to raise 4 terrific kids. Now 51, living on a quiet street in Kennebunk, Karen is very happily married to Joe Rakes, a good and decent man. But life was anything but good for Karen while she lived with her parents. Every day when the young Karen was making her father's bed at the old colony projects, as she was ordered to do, she would stare at the .38 caliber gun underneath his pillow. The house had always contained guns and rifles, including the 2 .22 caliber rifles in the corner of the bedroom. Even though the guns were never locked up, their father forbid them to touch them. Aware of their father's violent temper, this was a rule no Weeks kids ever thought of breaking. Karen, who had no choice but to touch the .38 under the pillow, often wondered what would happen if she used it to kill her father. How badly I wanted to do it, Karen admits. Every night when he came home, I thought of it. But jail didn't seem all that much worse than the house I lived in. But I guess I just never had the guts to do it. When Karen's excuse for a mother was in a rehab center, Karen, who had 4 children by then, was married to Joe Wakes, frequently went to visit, unable to turn her back on the woman who had been such an appalling mother and had always turned her back on her. During one such visit, while Karen was carefully setting her mother's thin hair in rollers, her mother said, "You know, I was just thinking about your father. He was a good husband and a good provider. He abused our kids, but he was good to me, and that's all that matters." Karen put down the comb. "I wanted to choke her to death at that very moment," she said. But again, a coward, I just walked out. A tattoo on Karen's right wrist reads loyalty. "Loyalty pretty much defends who I am," she said. "I am above all loyal to my family and to my friends, and I will always be loyal to Southie." Okay, now the women sitting right here. This, Nancy Young. "Grief is the price of love," says Nancy Young, repeating a life lesson she not only learned the hard way, but inherited from a long line of family members' emotional traumas. Breaking the cycle of dysfunction and demons had always been Nancy's priority. But despite distancing herself from suicide and addiction that afflicted all the men in her life, her father, her brother, the love of her life, and starting over in a new house, another life lesson emerged. You can run, but you can't hide. While Nancy's story is inspirational enough to stand on its own, Nancy considers her mother, Flo Young, inexorably tied to every aspect of the person she is today. Flo Young's resume is outstanding, evidence of a Southie woman who believed she could change the world for the better and did everything within her power to do it. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, Flo worked unremittingly for Head Start as a family service worker, a position similar to that of a social worker, sans the degree. Nancy knew that her mother adored every child that came through the program. "My mother saw the good in everyone, or always found an excuse or a reason for the troubled." Nancy's fondest memories come from her childhood spent in the old colony housing projects. "You might say we all put the word fun in dysfunction, and I mean that to be a compliment," she says. "You would walk out the door and there was always someone to hang out with. We had a huge park across the street and a beach right near it. Everyone in the projects knew one another and helped in times of struggles. You were never, never alone. We lived in the poorest part of town, but we felt a sense of pride shared by all us lower enders. There was nowhere else we would want to have lived." Still, the safety and well-being that Flo worked hard to bestow on all her clients no way extended to her own life. Tragedy knocked on Flo's door far too many times. Somehow she endured and still struggled to do what she could to help others. "I have many times thought," Nancy says, "why my family? But then I answered, why not? Why should I say that someone else should suffer to spare my pain?" While Nancy's brothers are recovering heroin addicts, both of whom started to do heroin in their early 30s, she would never place any of the fault on their problems on the face when they grew up. They were grown men who made that choice to stick a needle in their arm, Nancy says. "Today is doing good for them, but I have no idea what tomorrow will bring." Nancy understands only too well the whole perception of the power of heroin addiction and how it is different today that is now an epidemic. Still, there is no hell quite like the hell of watching dope change someone you love, turn into someone you don't even recognize, she says. In 1958, Nancy's sister Karen, whom she adored beyond words and who worked in the ICU department at Boston City Hospital, was brutally murdered by her boyfriend, a Vietnam vet, in the midst of a post-traumatic stress delusion in which he was seeing a Viet Cong in front of him rather than his beautiful girlfriend, Karen. 10 years later, when Mark Estes, Nancy's fiancé and the only man she ever loved, was murdered on the streets of South Boston, a murder that has never been solved, Nancy didn't think she could find the strength this time to survive yet another tragedy. 10 years trying to help someone find his self-worth, and it ends up with him between the yellow tape at a crime scene. But months after the unspeakable happened, I set out on a mission and I completed it. It would have been so much easier to have a pity party for myself. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for your needs and your wants, and I wanted to be happy and move out of the projects and buy myself my own house and do well in my job. And that is exactly what I did. I only hope that others who find themselves in the depths of despair will hear my mother's message to live for today, that it is a gift, and that is why we call it the present. She knew as I did that there is not always tomorrow, but most of all, she always reminded us to be proud of where we came from, never to be ashamed, and we never were. And now, I urge you all to take a deep breath as you listen to just a few pages of my co-author, Anna Weeks' indescribably powerful chapter, and she will talk to you about it afterwards. At age 21, once Anna reached sobriety, the question was, what was she going to do with her newfound life? Move out of South Boston, where she had lived her whole life? Get away from the people and places that had triggered her addictive personality? Try to combat her eating disorders, her compulsive shopping habits, attend AA every day of her life? None of the above, Anna says. Instead, I did what any good recovering addict would do. I found another addict to take care of. And that wasn't hard. In 1985, at age 21, less than a year after she got sober, Anna met the man who would change her life. Relating the story of their life together is painfully difficult for Anna. He has been the reason I've always hesitated to tell my story, she says. But there is no way I can eliminate the beautiful man who was my entire world for more than 20 years. But what she can do is change his name, referring him only as Michael, along with some other details to try and protect his privacy. But the truth is that our life together was so filled with pain and joy and despair and hope, with drugs and abuse, with love and dysfunction, that it can never be forgotten, Anna says. Michael made me the person I am today, and while he nearly destroyed me, I accept the lion's share of the blame for our nightmare of marriage. He was the sick one who struggled to become well. I was the well one who never understood or accepted his illness. All I did was love him so fiercely that I nearly killed the two of us. For now, this is my version, and I share it with the hopes that other women may somehow find solace in its ending. I surely have. Anna is brutally honest in her life about Michael. In a demented yet careful manner, I proceeded to throw away the next 20-plus years of my life. Good years I would never have a chance to live again. Years when I could have become a mother and raised a family the way my parents had. Instead, I spent those years chasing, enabling, fixing, begging, ignoring, and fearing this one man, and ending up defeated. In fact, I should have ended up dead, but I was a powerful addict myself, and in no way was I going to go down without a serious fight. Anna saw more of her husband in Massachusetts prisons than she did anywhere else. If Michael received a 3 or 4 year sentence, he was eligible for 3 visits per week, and Anna was there for every one of them. All of us who entered the prison as visitors were doing time right along with our inmates, she says. So Anna lived her double life, trying to stay upright on a dangerous merry-go-round she felt powerless to stop. If Michael were home, she was waiting for him to erupt. If he were in jail, she was waiting for a phone call or sitting on a prison bench. I learned to pretend that my life was good and normal, just like the lives of the other teachers with whom I worked or the people I passed on the street. It was inevitable that some people knew what my real life was. Southie was a small town in so many ways. I knew I wasn't the only woman in town who was leading a double life. I learned to pretend that my life was good and normal. No one would ever dare confront me any more than I would confront another woman like me. So long as I was dressed well, put on lots of makeup, covered my bruises, and kept my head high, then I was just fine doing my job. The moment did finally arrive, however, when she last began to understand she had no choice but to end their tortured relationship. For his sake, more than mine, she says. Most likely, I made his life in pain and addiction worse. I also knew I was a prison for him, and releasing him would be the best gift I could ever give my Michael. And then the next chapter of her life began, when the man who had been her good friend for many years, often saving her life when Michael was under the throes of a drug-addled rage, was released from prison after serving 5.5 years for his participation in 5 murders. Talk about jumping from the frying pan into the fire. As her attraction to Kevin Weeks grew, the man who had been Whitey Bulger's chief lieutenant for 25 years, Anna had to digest what he had done during those 25 years with Whitey. It was one thing to love a drug addict with a mental illness, and another to love an accessory to murder. And not just an accessory, but someone who had witnessed the murders, buried the bodies, and reburied them. Why would I want to become involved with a man who had committed such crimes? Why couldn't I just say, he's no good, and walk away? Why did I see good in this bad man? A warmth and gentleness that I could not close my eyes to. Bitter in her heart, despite her inner turmoil, Anna knew she was doing the right thing. I knew who Kevin was, she said, and I knew, despite his past, that he had forsaken a life of crime, that he was a good man who would always treat me well and would offer me a calm, loving life. I believed the pledge he made every morning. Today, I will not commit another crime. His drama was in the past. We both believed we deserved better and were determined to give that to one another. And that, miraculously, is exactly what happened when Anna experienced the happiest day of her life at age 51, November 3rd, 2015, at 12:58 p.m., fulfilling a lifetime dream of becoming a mother. I glanced up at my husband, Kevin, looking as handsome and proud as ever, the one man who would love me with a strength I would never stop cherishing, as he used his gloved hands to guide our son Julian into the light, insisting he had to tug hard to get him into the world. My heart swelled with joy, for now I was complete. All the suffering and disappointment of my former life had disappeared. Life has even gotten better for Anna Weeks, as 2 more precious babies have entered her life. Maximilian, known as Max, arrived 13 months after Julian, and Annabella Weeks joined her 2 brothers this past April. Now, 54, the mother of 3 babies, Anna is the first to tell you she's heartbroken that there will be no more babies. But Brigham and Women's fertility program put a limit, and that is it. One would think that 3 babies in 3 years and a full-time teaching job would be enough for Anna, but I know her well, and I can assure you it is not. I live, sleep, and breathe the 4 lives of my life, Anna says, and I live by the sea in Southie, the only hometown I could ever love. I will never forget all the pain and disappointment of my former life, nor will I ever stop being grateful for the gifts that have been given to Anna Palazzola Weeks. Who could ever have thought such miracles could happen? Okay, I would like to let Anna have a chance to talk to you now, and she can answer any questions, and she can tell a little bit about her life.
Okay. I just would like to tell you the reason why I wanted to write the book. I used to go to book signings with my husband all the time, and people would be asking all these questions about Southie and Whitey, and you know, I always felt that I had the need to defend being from South Boston, whether I was teaching, whether I was out on the street. You know, I would say I was from Southie, and I'd get that look like, oh, like, look at this one. And I would sit there during book signings, and people would be telling, you know, these horrific stories about Whitey and, you know, growing up in a town where there was such, you know, controversial things that happened. And I would want to raise my hand and say, I wish they were still back together, these men. I'm not excusing anything that Whitey did or my husband, but we had our own sense of security with these men. Whitey kept heroin off the street and the opiates. Yes, he dealt in cocaine, and at that time it was more of a social drug. Now, many years later, all drugs are considered horrific, but he protected us. If a husband beat a wife, he would think twice because they would be getting a visit from Whitey. He tried to keep some type of honor in the town. And when that gang was dismembered, we fell apart in some ways. Heroin addiction is running rampant, and I'm not just saying that it happened in Southie, but I had a much different view, and I guess I just, growing up there, and my mother lived there her whole life, I just had such a sense of pride. So I really needed to get these words out because I was tired of people looking upon us that we were less than, or, you know, they would always have this about busing on the TV, and they would always interview a woman coming out of a bar room who was toothless, and no one ever believed that we were educated, and it wasn't a black and white situation. African Americans didn't want to ship their kids over across the city, nor did we want to go there, but it turned into such a stigma for Southie. So I would sit at book sign-ins, and I would hold all this in, and sometimes I'd, have to raise my hand to answer a question or not. And I was teaching kindergarten this year, and I started writing notes. And I had about, 25 pages of handwritten paper. And although I was friends with Phyllis, I was really afraid to approach her. And I said to her on what, they were all wrinkled, and I said, will you look at these? And she said, I'm taking my granddaughter down to New York, Anna, and I'll read them on the train. And she called me on that Sunday night, and she said, I think we should give this a go. And I'll never forget that. It took many twists and turns. Originally, the book was mostly about me, and then God did what I couldn't do for myself because I still live in the town. And then these other women were brought in, and I was very grateful for them. And Kevin's sister in particular, I never knew why she wanted to write the story, and I wish she was here to tell this part of it. She was ashamed of her life. She was secretive about what happened in her home, but she said the one reason she wanted to write it was because she wanted the world to know what type of house her brother grew up in. And I'm not excusing his behavior. It was horrific. But he was 18 years old and grew up in a place where his father beat them almost to death while the mother turned her head. Whitey offered him $2,000 at age 18 to beat up a guy. And he said, Anna, that looked better to me than a full ride to Harvard, which he got. Both of his brothers graduated from Harvard. So he's an intelligent man. And she said, I had to get the courage and I had to get the strength to share about where my brother came from, because he wasn't all bad. He lived what he learned. And myself as a teacher, I see it every day. You know, these kids who come to us, they're great kids, but they just live what they learn. And so that's the reason I wanted to write the book. I'm not going to keep going on and on, but yeah, and another thing, you know, I went to a book signing in South Boston, and I told my mother, I said, Ma, Phyllis is going to read a couple of pages out of my story. She goes, I hope it's nothing bad. And I said, Ma, it's all pretty bad. I said, you know, but it got better. So she's still, you know, of this type, what goes on here stays here. I'm like, that's over, Ma. I'm very grateful the book was written. It was a healing process. I'm very grateful to Nancy. Her story's the end, and I knew her mom as well. And Nancy later on told me that her mother would always say, you know, if Anna doesn't get away from that man, she's going to end up dead, Nancy. So I'm grateful God looked out for me. And I'm still friends with my ex-husband today. He's incarcerated again. But this book has brought a lot of healing. You know, I was in work the other day. One of the teachers I work with is here, whom I love. And I was in the elevator. I work on one side of the school, and there's a school for the deaf on the other side. So I don't know this teacher as well, but she got in the elevator and she said, you're from Southie, you know? She said, Whitey's dead. And she was like, what a glorious day. And I had everything I could do to zip it, because I never changed my name in school. I keep Anna Pelizzola, and so not a lot of people know that I'm married to Kevin. But I wanted to say I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, it's just, it was a part in history or a part of my growing up that I can't let go of. I wrote my thesis in grad school on him and what it's done to a community or a neighborhood when you had false feelings or hopes, and it all come crumbling down. But I had mixed feelings the day he died. I'm going to be quiet, and I just want to thank everyone. This is a great crowd for a Sunday. Thank you.
I wanted to just add what you said about Whitey dying. Kevin and I wrote a book. We written brutal, and there was a lot of stuff we couldn't put into that. So we wrote a fictional book called Where's Whitey? And we were very excited about it. I thought it was a great, great book. It was fiction. And it came out on June 3rd, 2011. There was just one problem with the book called Where's Whitey? Whitey was found that night. So who wants to buy a book called Where's Whitey when you know he was in Santa Monica, or sitting there in a dumb-looking condo or apartment where we had him all over the world and everything. So the fact that he died when this book came out, I think he owed that to us because it got national attention back on and helped with the publicity of the book beyond this area. Okay, any questions, anything? Thank you so much. And I can tell you, it's not easy to tell the stories.
Mary actually private messaged me. We grew up in Oak Colony, Mary as well, and Tina. We had a lot of fun, Tina. Too much sometimes. But there was always stories about the bad boys of South Boston, and there was so much more to South Boston than the bad boys. So when I was asked, I went to my brothers because they're heroin addicts, and they have children, and everybody has stories. And that they had said to me that if it could help one person not want to follow down that line of doing heroin and save them or whatnot, to go forth and do it. So I did ask my family first, but I did it through my part of the book is relevant to showing how my mother helped us go through a lot of adversity and struggles with drugs and murders and suicides and really hard times, and how she did it. And she did a great job, God rest her soul.
And she'd be proud of your story. Definitely.
Hope so.
Oh, I know so. But I love that, a safe place in which to tell your story. And that's what I really hope that that book does. That it was a safe place.
Well, it's a book about families and how you got yourself out of the depths of despair and how you survived and where you are. And hopefully it does help a lot of other people who are struggling, because we all have struggles. We're all flawed. We all have, I'm not saying everybody, but each person here may have somebody who was a drug addict, or somebody who was murdered, or someone who committed suicide, or just somebody was abused. A lot of, or friends that have suffered through it. And it's about survival, and really it's about women leading the way on how to deal with family issues. No disrespect to men, because they are very pivotal in our lives, but this one does gear towards the woman and how they help families endure through struggles and pain and suffering and rise above it.
And Phyllis, she really, through this whole time writing the book, and it's taken us years and years. How many years? Maybe 6 years. We've had, the book had 2 women, it had 4 women, it turned into so many different things. And Phyllis really was our advocate. She was our therapist. More times than not, we hung up crying. It was a very, very emotional for Phyllis. She became involved in each of our lives, and it was just a hard journey. So she really deserves the praise here. I mean, we lived it, and we have when you go through such trauma or disappointment in life, you don't become immune to it. But Phyllis, like she said when she wrote Kevin's book, she was a woman from Marblehead who didn't know anything about, and Kevin would be screaming at her on the phone, and I would be like, are you kidding me, Kevin? She has no idea. He's like, Anna, she doesn't know what extortion is, and what's the matter with her? And I'm like, Kevin, she doesn't know. I mean, like, not everyone, we weren't only educated in school, we were educated in the streets. I mean, we didn't even have cops where we grew up. All you had to do is, I mentioned one line in the book that, well, most of the world was honoring the president. We were looking up to Whitey Bulger. I'm like, Kevin, she doesn't know. So she really deserves the credit here for putting up with all of us, because it was it was
interesting.
No, and I think with, thank you. No, but with Kevin, truthfully, he should have had a different writer. Kevin should have had a different writer. There should have been a man that had did it, but they threw me into it, the lion's den. And but I have to say, the book became a New York Times bestseller. So I think maybe the fact that I didn't know anything was good, because I had no prejudgments or anything like that. And for these women, understand too, that they did this. No recompense. They weren't paid for this. There's nothing that they got for this. They just did it because they honestly felt their stories could help other people. So I will forever be grateful to that, and they're remarkable. Okay.
And there was such a misconception of South Boston over the years, and it was a great place to grow up in. It was, there was never positive publicity about it. There always seemed to be negative, and it's interesting now because people are forking over crazy amounts of money to live there. I wish they still didn't like us. You know what I'm saying?
A little unpopularity?
Like, unfortunately, they found out how great it was to live, and a lot of people who lived there are no longer going to live there, and that was some of our reasoning for writing it, was to keep South Boston on the map, especially as the older place it was, because honestly it's almost like the Boston accent's going to become obsolete. There's not people from Boston all living together anymore, and children learn from the schools that they go to, the accents that they have. And I only say that because I did have a nephew one day say, he's 8, he lives in Braintree. Why do you talk like that? I'm like, wow. You know, and that was when I thought, I said, that's interesting. Like, we're really going to lose an accent because the towns are being gentrified and it's not everybody living together anymore. So it's something obsolete that we're trying to just hold and contain in here and stuff like that.
Well, we think of South Boston as a character in the book. We include a map, and it literally is. I'm sorry, did someone have a question?
She did.
Yes.
I've always been very proud of the fact that I come from Southie, but now I'm even more proud because I have read the book. The book was amazing.
Thank
St.
you.
Augustine's is no longer around. That's gone. Where you lived is gone. Where I lived isn't gone yet. They're going to knock that down in a couple of weeks. But thank you. It was.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank
I
you.
picked it up. I read it. I didn't get up off the chair. I've been, went right through. And,
That's nice.
Oh, you are so
Thank you.
kind.
and your mom would have been very proud of you.
Thank
today.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
She knew my mother.
Thank you so much.
And the Marion Man is being sold.
Yes. I know.
There's nothing
Like
else.
it's and that's what that was.
The
Yeah.
other thing that we talked about, this is my very best friend who lived on Patterson Way.
My sister
We didn't
Carolyn
know
lived on
that all of this was going on.
We had no idea.
We had no idea who Whitey Bulger was.
Really?
No.
Well, your mother did.
Well, yeah.
But they didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about it.
Tell them what Whitey and your mother did.
Well, I don't know if everybody
Oh, dear.
is aware of the fact that
The way you said that, what they did. Oh
you
boy.
played the number,
The number.
the street number. Okay, so my mother played the number. And she had the local bookie come to the house and, all this stuff. We didn't know this until after. Well, anyway, they were half numbers.
They were what numbers?
Half.
Yeah.
Half.
Like if it came out to be the date, you got half the money
Okay.
and not the
Okay.
full money. Well, my mother didn't have a proverbial pot to what.
Right.
So she hit the number for $300. But they said, no, you only get $150 because it's my birthday or whatever. No, that was not going to happen. So she marched her fanny up to the liquor store.
Yeah.
Marched her fanny into the back room and said, is there someone in charge here? And this gentleman looked up at her and just kept staring at her, and she goes, this is unacceptable. I want my $300, blah, 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 blah. And he's just looking and looking at her. And she also had the bookie with her bookie.
Good.
And he said, the gentleman reached his hand under the table, and the bookie that my mother was with said, oh my God, he's going to blow her head off. And he took out the $300 and gave it to my mother and said, see you later. She walked out, okay, thank you very much.
And who was that
And
man?
it was Whitey,
It was Whitey.
who she accosted that day, you can call it.
God love her.
I think he just looked at her and said, I'm going to give this lady.
Get her out of
Give her her
here.
money.
Sometimes you know when you've met your match.
Right. But very true. The book was very honest and
thank you.
truthful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, thank you all so much. And we're here if you want to ask any other questions, please feel free.